The first stage of Canada's Passenger Bill of Rights has now come into effect. It offers defined compensation for customers who are involuntarily bumped from flights. Is it fair, though? Some say no. Ian Lee is an associate prof at Carleton University's Sprott School of Business. And of course, the some who say no are the airlines, mostly, Ian. We have this response, a legal response from IATA. So it's a globally coordinated response saying, we already have rules in place. This is unnecessary, goes too far. What's your take on the right balance that needs to be struck here?
Like many things that government does, and government is a good, is a force for good, by and large in society, but they are often late to the game and solving problems that have already been solved. I'm saying that as somebody who has been traveling for the better part of my adult life. I have flown over 100 times across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in the last 30 years, teaching in countries in Asia and in Central and East Europe. And by the way, Amanda, I do not consult or have any financial compensation coming from anyone in that industry, directly or indirectly. And my point where I'm going is that if we had been talking about this 5 years ago, I would have said, oh, absolutely, we desperately need government to come in and regulate the mess. Mm-hmm. But in the last 5 years, the Canadian airlines have, I think, improved enormously. I think partly because Rovanescu, that remarkable CEO of Air Canada, who has transformed Air Canada, has really raised the bar, and they're doing a vastly better job than they did even 5 years ago by dealing with things like announcements of flight delays, tarmac delays, and that sort of thing. Far better communication than before, and I think there's far fewer cancellations, at least from my memory, than it was 5 years ago where it was the norm.
What about the optics, though? I mean, it kind of strikes, we all understand, theoretically why overbooking happens, right? It's because no-shows happen, and they have all of the data to back it up. There's a certain percentage of people who say they're coming to your party and they don't come. But every now and then everyone shows up and it's a bit of a mess. So my question to you would be the optics of having to have government on the one hand, easy PR win, saying, we're fighting for the little guy here. And then the airlines have to stand up and say, no, we don't want you to fight for our customers. It just looks bad.
I've actually witnessed this. I've been bumped, I assure you, not very often, but it's happened to me. I was flying into Bahamas last winter, and it wasn't Air Canada, it was an American carrier, and I watched the market unfold before my eyes as they announced over the intercom, there's too many on the plane. Will anybody accept $200 to get off the plane? No takers. 5 minutes later, we're offering $400. Are there any takers? They bid all the way up to $1,800 US before they got enough people to take the offer to get off the plane. In other words, it was a market in action before our eyes. And I think, I certainly don't know the inner machinations at IATA. I suspect what they want is the flexibility to have these spontaneous markets on a flight-by-flight basis where necessary. And as somebody who believes in the efficiency of markets as I do, having traveled around the world and seen centrally or quasi-centrally planned economies and what a disaster they are, I like spontaneous markets because they work, and they work very well.
One of the problems, of course, we have is one way that the airlines use a market system is based on ticket price. So ironically, that trip to Bahamas, the family that saved every penny they had and bought a discount ticket months in advance is the first in line to be bumped, not the last. It's the business class traveler who booked it last week who won't get bumped. Are there things like that kind of create sort of the bad sentiment around the edges that maybe the airlines do need to be, this is a wake-up call, maybe you do need to be looking at these practices?
Well, the one point, and before, I don't want you to think I'm trashing everything that they're proposing in these regulations. There is some common sense in there. One is that the airline should seek a voluntary solution by asking people to voluntarily give up their seat in exchange for compensation. Right. So that's a good thing. They're doing the market solution before they turn to command and control, where they tell you you've been kicked off the plane against your will, which I'm not a fan of, having experienced that. So, I think they are building some flexibility in the rules. My bigger concern, Amanda, is that these fines, which are kicking in December, mid-December of this year, are pretty draconian. And what I'm worried about, of course, is that they're going to be passed on to you and I. Yes. There is no free lunch in this world. There is no Santa Claus. And so you and me, as the paying public, are going to be paying for these. And fortunately, there is a loophole. That is to say, it's only if caused by the airline. And I just don't buy the argument that all of the employees of Air Canada and Porter and WestJet are sitting around trying to stop the plane from leaving, as some regulators and NGOs would have us believe. They are working assiduously to get that plane out of the gate. So it doesn't happen that often, is my point.
Okay, let me just say quickly for all of our viewers who are 9 or younger, there is, of course, a Santa Claus, and Ian Lee was just making a metaphor there. You can just ignore that part of this conversation. But on the other side of the ledger, Ian, are those who say that these don't go far enough in the sense that the loophole is mechanical failure. So I have to, A, file a claim for compensation, doesn't happen automatically, and B, if the airline says it was mechanical problems beyond their control, I don't get it. And so consumer advocates are saying it's not going to be enough, that you'll never get paid because the airline can always claim a mechanical problem.
Right. Well, indeed, what they're running up against is, sorry, but it's reality. We live in the second coldest climate on the planet Earth after Russia. It is a harsh, unforgiving climate, having flown frequently in the winter, planes break down, the icing and the conditions become impossible, airports are even closed. And so they're really fighting this fact that I think most flights, if I had the data, and I don't, unfortunately, I think we would find that most delayed flights are due to errors and mistakes or problems beyond the airline's control, starting with lousy weather. And so it probably will be the saving grace in this bill and these regulations that it won't produce incredibly expensive costs to the airline, because I think you're right that they'll be able to justify most of the delays, etc., as beyond their control. But at least it creates a set of rules. How long can you leave them in the plane, on the tarmac before you got to bring them back to the gate, or give them communication and drinks and so forth. So I mean, I do support that.
I do think it's funny that the thing you like best about this is that it probably won't be effective, and therefore won't cause prices to go up. One argument that IATA is making, and the reason IATA is the one making it, is that the rules should be global, that they shouldn't have different rules in Frankfurt than they do in Toronto. Is there some case to be made there, or do we just kind of shrug and say businesses have to deal with that all the time and they should get over it?
I like that idea because, of course, it is annoying. I mean, I can give you a much more concrete problem. You know, you get on one airline and they say you can carry on 15 pounds on the plane and it can only be 18 inches wide or long. And you get on the next plane you're connecting to and they have a completely different set of rules pertaining to the size of the luggage. That cries out for standardization. And given that the global system is interconnected, in other words, Air Canada is connected to Frankfurt and connected to Lufthansa and all the planes that fly across the airlines that fly across the ocean. And so this is because it's a global industry by definition. They're flying across borders. I do think that we need a global solution where there's one set of rules governing all those planes, all those airlines, whether they're flying into American airspace or French or Italian or German, because it really is annoying. It's like the old days when they had 28 or 32 currencies in the European Union before they went to the euro, and you had to be constantly changing currencies. It's a similar argument. It's very inefficient.